Have you ever seen someone just absolutely dismantle an idea using nothing but words? Not just argue with it, but take it apart piece by piece. Well, today we're going to look at a master of that craft, H.L. Mencken. We're going to see how he didn't just disagree with an ideology, he put it on trial. So, that's the big question, right? How do you attack an idea with words? I mean, really attack it. Not just find a few flaws, but build a case so strong that the whole thing just crumbles. It takes a lot more than just a strong opinion. It takes a strategy. It takes powerful language, and honestly, it takes guts.
And the guy we're putting under the microscope today is one of the all-time greats, H.L. Mencken. He was a journalist and a critic back in the early 20th century, and he was famous for his razor-sharp wit and prose that, let's be honest, took no prisoners.
What we're going to do is break down his all-out assault on the puritanical mindset that was so dominant in his time. But here's the twist. We're not just going to read it like a regular essay. Nope, we're going to treat this whole thing like a courtroom drama, with Mencken as the brilliant, fiery prosecutor, building his case, presenting his evidence, and making his closing argument to the jury, which is us. Okay, so every trial has to start somewhere, right? It starts with the indictment. What is the central charge? What is the core accusation that Mencken levels against Puritanism and the way it was shaping American life? So his case basically boils down to three main charges. First, he argues that all this moralistic lawmaking doesn't actually make people virtuous. It just makes them really good at being hypocrites. Second, it doesn't protect the average citizen. It actually targets them. It persecutes them. And third, it doesn't make people respect the law. It makes them resent it, and it degrades the whole legal system from the inside out. And all of that leads to this absolutely bone-chilling conclusion. He says that under this system, your average person, the democratic citizen, simply has no rights that the people in power feel they have to honor. But it's not just what he's saying here, it's the history packed into those specific words. And this is where you see the genius at work. That phrase, no rights bound to respect, is a direct echo of the Supreme Court's disgusting Dred Scott decision from 1857, which said that Black Americans had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. By borrowing that exact language, Mencken creates this shocking, explosive comparison. He's saying that the political outsider in his day is being treated with the same legal contempt as an enslaved person was before the Civil War. I mean, what a move! So you might be wondering, how does he actually build this case? Well, let's open up the prosecutor's briefcase here and take a look at the specific tools, the rhetorical weapons, he uses to make his argument so incredibly powerful. Okay, look at this. This right here is his signature move. On one side, you've got the official, formal, almost noble language of the law, words like statutes, due process, jury trial. And on the other side, he gives you the brutal, violent reality of how that law is enforced. Clubbed, jailed, lynching. He is constantly smashing these two completely different worlds of language together in the same sentences. And you've got to understand, that collision of words, that's not just a fancy writing trick. That is the argument. He's showing you the massive, gaping canyon between the promise of something like due process and the reality of getting clubbed. That space between the two columns, that's where his whole critique lives. It's wild. Even the way he builds his sentences supports his point. They're often long, complicated, full of all these winding clauses. You kind of have to fight your way through them, just like a person trying to navigate a bureaucratic, hostile legal system. He calls it a mill of justice. It's not a system that thinks or judges. It's just a machine that grinds people up. All right, so let's talk about his weapon of choice, because he definitely has one. It's a rhetorical tool called invective. And trust me, this is way more sophisticated than just slinging insults. So, what is invective? It's the art of the verbal attack, for sure. It's abusive, it's critical language. But here's the key difference. Real invective isn't just name-calling. It fuses that contempt with actual evidence. It builds a case. It uses facts and quotes to fuel its fire, making the attack not just mean, but devastatingly effective. So what makes Mencken's invective so powerful? What separates it from just another angry rant on the internet? One word: control. You can feel this white-hot rage burning behind the words, but the prose itself is ice-cold. It's precise, it's perfectly constructed. It's not just anger. It's anger organized by a brilliant mind. Okay, theory is great, but let's see this stuff in action. For our Exhibit A, we're going to look at Mencken's takedown of a sermon by a guy named Bishop Wilson. This is a perfect, almost textbook example of his whole prosecutorial method. He uses this killer three-step move. First, he introduces the bishop with all this fake, over-the-top ceremonial respect. It's almost funny. Then, step 2, he just gets out of the way and quotes the bishop's own inflammatory words directly, with no commentary. And then, for the finishing blow, he quietly points out that nobody else, not the press, not other leaders, said a single word against it.
And here it is. This is the evidence he submits to the court. He just lets Bishop Wilson speak for himself. The bishop literally argues that atheism is so evil that the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech shouldn't apply to it. Mencken doesn't have to call the guy an enemy of freedom. He lets the bishop do it for him.
And that is the absolute genius of it. It's a pure prosecutor's move. Present the evidence, in this case, the quote, and then turn to the jury, who is us, the readers, and just let us draw the obvious conclusion. He convicts the bishop using the man's own testimony. It's masterful. And that brings us to the end of the trial, the closing argument. After presenting all the evidence, after all the intellectual fury, Mencken shifts gears to make his final and maybe his most important point. You can feel the change. The anger starts to fade, and it's replaced by something else entirely, a kind of deep sadness, a melancholy. He's no longer just a prosecutor angry about a crime. He's now someone grieving a profound loss. And here is his final plea. He asks, really, what's the point of having all the trappings of the American dream, money, a car, if you have to live in constant fear, if you know your neighbors are spying on you, and the most respected man in town, the pastor, is actively plotting your destruction?
Let's put this sentence under the microscope for a second. He starts with that old-fashioned, biblical-sounding phrase, what avails it, basically using his opponent's language against them. Then he grounds it in these totally normal, relatable images. Money in the bank, a Ford in the garage. He makes you feel safe and comfortable. And then, bam, he springs the trap with that last word, jail. It just shatters the whole peaceful domestic scene he just painted.
So when you boil it all down, this is his final point. The real, ultimate cost of this kind of thinking isn't just a few bad laws or unfair arrests. It's the complete destruction of something much more precious, common decency, and the mutual trust between people that holds a society together. And that leaves us with a pretty heavy question, one that's just as relevant today as it was in Mencken's time. He was writing about a specific moment in history, but this dynamic he describes, a society that polices itself, that watches its own members for any deviation, that's timeless. And it forces us, even now, to ask ourselves, where exactly is the line between a community upholding its values and that community falling into persecution?